And welcome back to my channel. This is a dedicated IT channel. We talk about all things related to hardware, software, networking, and everything else in between. If you're new to the channel and find this content helpful, please like and subscribe. We're going to be launching new content roughly once a week. But before we get into today's video, I'm going to put a disclaimer on these videos. These videos are meant to help guide you on your journey of learning PowerShell. We do not take any responsibility for the harm that may come to your production networks for the commandlets that you enter and execute. Please make sure that you fully understand the commandlets that you are entering and executing on your production networks before executing them. As always, you should be running commandlets first in a non-production environment to ensure that no harm comes to your network. There are a ton of resources out there that you can use to make sure that your commandlets and scripts are going to work properly and not cause harm to your networks or environment. With that out of the way, in the last video we talked about what PowerShell is and how we can use it to gather information about AD users, how to filter that information, and how to output that information into a more reader-friendly format. Today's video, we're going to be talking about variables and how we can use them to help us with storing and recalling information inside of PowerShell to help further push information down the garden hose. A variable is a piece of data that allows us to store whatever we want inside of it, within reason. Think of a variable as a backpack. A backpack can store just about anything you'd want to carry from one point to another. A variable does the same thing. Variables help take user inputs and put them inside of our code to help achieve an end goal. Whether that be creating a new user, updating a distribution list, or any other reason we would need to store and recall data. Let's take a look at how we can construct variables and how we can implement them into our code to help us achieve the end goal of whatever we are trying to do. So if you take a look out on the screen, you see a lot of different things going on. You've got some curly brackets, you've got these weird icons with a money sign and then some words after it, or what looks to be words. They're a different color than other text that's on the screen. And a little bit further down, we've actually got some commandlets here that help import some things to allow us to connect to the Active Directory or Exchange console so we can manage mailboxes and things like that. So the funny icons with the money sign in front of them are variables in PowerShell. They might look a little different in a different coding language, but there are variables that can be used in that as well. So when we want to enter something and hold on to that input, we'll put it into a variable. And that's because a variable is malleable, which means we can mutate it and change it however we want. We can put in there just about anything from PowerShell, and we can recall it and put it into another part of the script to combine the data or create a table of information that we're looking at. So it's extremely useful that you know how to use variables effectively, because you could put a variable for anything. You can take a variable and enter a commandlet and then just store that variable to, let's say, get AD user. If that's a commandlet that you run a lot of the times, you can just enter in let's say you want to call it money sign get AD equals, and then parenthesis get AD user space tac properties asterisk end parenthesis. And what that'll do is and you hit enter, it'll store that in that variable, so it stores that commandlet. So anytime that you want to run that command, you can just enter in the variable name, so money sign get AD, and it's going to automatically execute that. So it's really useful when you're creating a code or a user menu that you can store things in those variables. If you look right here under number 1, under this do loop that we have right here, we've got 2 different variables that we've created and that we recall in the same do loop. So the first variable that we actually create is called user. And what this is going to do is it's going to equal read host prompt, which prompts for the user input, and it says input username you wish to copy. So what this will do is when you actually run this, you will see, if you look down here on the bottom of the screen, there's actually a terminal. We'll say user equals read host tact prompts, quote, input user name of the user you wish to copy. Okay, so we'll end quote. So when we store this, notice how when we hit the enter button, it automatically returns that line of text that we just finished typing. And that's what read host does. Read host will actually put up on the screen whatever you want it to, as long as it's inside of not parentheses, but quotes. So a read host will prompt something to a user. It'll say, hey, I need your input, and then it'll wait for them to type in something. And that something they type in is then stored inside of that variable. So if I were to put in JDoGood and hit the enter button, JDoGood is now stored inside of that variable of user. Okay, but when we run that, it's going to then show us our entry, JDoGood. So we can now recall this at any point in time with either hitting the up arrow or later on down if you've typed in a few different commandlets and you just want to pull it up real quick. You can say, all right, you know, money sign user, that's my variable. What's inside of this variable? And it's JDoGood, which is what we entered when we were prompted to. So that's the basic functionality of a variable. It stores that information that the user input or the part of the code that we have pushing into that. So right down below, we have write host. And this basically cements what we want inside of that variable. So if we were to do, oh, no, I don't want it there. That's a Control Z. Write host, quote, user, end quote. It's going to output what we've put into that variable. And we use those as stopgaps or information check to make sure that that is what you actually put in there and that's what you want to use. And then down below, you have getAdUser with that variable pushed inside. So right here, last time we talked about getAdUser space tac identity. That's where you put the username. But you can shorthand that and leave out the word identity, and PowerShell is going to automatically infer that the next bit of information that follows getAdUser is going to be the user's identity or the username of the person that you're looking at, without being told this is the identity. So it's extremely useful. You can kind of shorten your code and clean it up a little bit when you want to code out a lot of things and you start having a lot of lines of information and you want to keep things to a minimum. You can take some parts out here and there, and PowerShell will automatically know what you're talking about. So it's a little intuitive like that. So it's kind of nice when you start getting into all the code and you need to put a lot in, or you have a lot of variables, but you don't want to keep putting in, tag properties, identity this, identity that. So it's really kind of nice. So we'll put in getAdUser, and then we'll plug in our variable. So our variable that we have in down here is JDoGood. So if you think of us as we executed this script, the user that we now have in here is JDoGood. So what it's going to do is pull the rest of this information relating to JDoGood specifically, because as you remember, the getAdUser returns a small block of information, but there's a whole bunch more that we can get if we call upon it in PowerShell. So this is where this comes into play, because now this getAdUser with the user variable is going to pull all this additional information for us, and we never typed in the username into the commandlet because it was inside of this variable for us. So at the end of this do loop, we have a confirmation. It says read host prompt, is this correct? So once this executes the getAdUser portion of this, it displays all the information on your screen and allows you to verify it. And then if it's not correct, it's actually going to go back through and reloop it, which is why it says while confirmation not equal to yes. So as long as this isn't equal to yes or a y, it is going to keep looping through and getting this variable and putting this information into the variable for you until it's the right right set of information. So if we were to copy this and go down here, we could paste it, okay? And as soon as we hit enter, it's going to ask us to input a name. So we'll do J Dogood. And see how all the information automatically populated for us, but we didn't type out any of the additional fields that we wanted. It just automatically put it in and executed it for us. This is a script. This is a portion of automation because it automatically pulled the additional information for us. So you write it once and you can rinse, ring, and repeat. So where it says, is this information correct? We'll say no, and it's going to automatically push us back to this, and we can say, you know, JDoe. This is the user I wanted. So now this information in the variable has been changed. So if I hit yes, that variable is now going to automatically pull all of this additional information for us. So if we put in $user, we get JDoe. Okay, so if we wanted to store all of this right here inside of this variable, we would need to create a new variable, because you don't typically overwrite a variable unless it's only going to be used once and you want to overwrite the information that's in there. But I usually just create a different variable in that instance, because I call my variables multiple times throughout my scripts in multiple different ways, so I don't like to overwrite them if I can avoid it. So in keeping with this, we want to store all the information above that we copied, right? So that we displayed out in PowerShell, but now we want to store this information in a variable. So we've created a new variable called user1 is equal to getAD user variable that we just filled in, and it stores the additional information that we requested. So now if we were to run this, this is going to automatically execute because all the information is inside of it, and it's not going to show you anything, but all that information is now inside of the variable. So if we were to do user1, we now have all the information that we wanted to see. So think of this top part as an initial check of what information you're pulling, and you want to look to make sure that you have the right user targeted that you want to copy. And then if it's not, you go back through until you find the one that you want, and then you hit the yes button, and then the next line of the script automatically writes everything above because it repeats itself except with a variable at the beginning of this. So as we move further on down this script, we go inside of another do loop. And inside of this do loop, as you can see, we have a lot of variables. But each one of these variables does a different thing that later on in the script is going to be called upon to create a new user. So what this is doing right here when it says $new user is equal to null, as we talked about last time, null is empty, null is blank, null is 0, in binary it's off. Okay, so I wipe my variables on something that loops, because there are some instances where PowerShell will hold on to this information and it'll muddle everything up, and it'll do what they call concatenation, and it'll put all that information together in one line. So I might end up with a new user variable that has John Joe as the name that's in there, even though it's supposed to be John or Joe, not both of their names together. So it's good practice to get in to make sure that if you do have a do loop, that you wipe the information that's stored inside of the variables. If you have an instance of, no, this isn't correct, and it loops back through, you want to make sure that you start off with a clean and empty variable so you don't have multiple bits of information. So moving on to the next one, the new user, which is the top one we saw, there's that read host again. So read host is extremely useful when you want to prompt for information entered into PowerShell by a user that's, let's say, you know, sat in front of a computer that's trying to create this new user. So let's say I masterminded this script, and Jimmy, my coworker, is tasked with creating a new user. He can open up this PowerShell menu that I've created, and he can execute this command without knowing anything about PowerShell, and it's going to automatically prompt for information from him. And all he has to do is just type in the basic information, and the script is going to do the rest. So the new user, it'll be stored in this variable, whatever name you enter, which is typically the full name. And down below, there's another new variable called first. And what this is going to do is this is going to take the information from new user, and it's going to split it at the first white space to the left and the white space to the right. So the 0 points to everything to the left of the white space, and the 1 points to everything to the right of the white space. So I can split someone's name when I enter Johnny Smith, if there's a space in his name, PowerShell is going to automatically grab everything to the left of the white space, so Johnny space Smith. It'll grab Johnny and store it in the first variable, and it'll do the same thing for the last that's just underneath it, except it's going to grab everything to the right of the white space, so it's going to grab Smith and store it inside of the last variable. So the SAM variable is the SAM account name or the logon name that a user is going to enter when they walk up to a domain-based computer to log into it to access the network resources. And all that's going to do is it's going to take the user's input or the user logon ID. 90% of the time, it'll be first name, initial, last name. So for Johnny, it would be J. Smith. And it would store J. Smith inside of the SAM variable for us to recall later on in the script that actually creates the account. Same thing with department. We use department IDs to help with creating the mailboxes because we have automatic scripts that automatically set our email addresses for our new users, so we don't have to think about it. They can go, if they're in a different store, depending on the store abbreviation, our exchange is going to go out and look at the department ID and go, oh, they're in this store, so we're going to create this address. The user principal name is when you're walking through, let's say, a new user creation in Active Directory. We'll give it a second because it's a server and it's slow. So let's say we wanted to create a new user. We'll go new and user. Johnny Smith, user logon name. This is your SAM account name, J. Smith. And the principal name is this part right here, @siegenetworks.com. So everything together, jsmith@siegenetworks.com is the user's principal name. That's what their primary name is in the Active Directory. But because you're on the local network, you don't have to put @siegenetworks.com or siegenetworks /jsmith. It automatically does that for you, and it's something most people don't think about when they're on a domain computer, but their actual logon name is jsmith@siegenetworks.com if they were to walk up to a non-domain based computer and attempt to log in. So that just kind of shows you what that principle is. And then the password, we set a password for the new account, and with PowerShell, passwords must be entered into a secure string. There's a couple of different ways to do it. I like personally just making it a secure string as the user inputs it. The downfall to that is it's only going to show you asterisks or dots. It's not actually going to show you what you typed in. So there is room for error if you make a typo or you forgot the password. You're going to have to go back and reset it. But I always try to copy and paste passwords, which you can copy and paste into PowerShell. You write the password on a notepad in plain text to make sure that your capitalization and special characters and numbers are all set correctly. Then you can highlight it, copy it, and then in PowerShell, the dirty little secret to pasting in PowerShell is not actually Control-V. The most useful thing to copy and paste into PowerShell is just right-clicking the mouse button. That is going to automatically paste in, as you can see, anything that you've copied that's on your clipboard and put it in there. So the last thing you copied, which was that user one, I copied that, and it's going to automatically put it into PowerShell for us just by simply right-clicking on our mouse button instead of trying to do Control-V, because sometimes Control-V will give you the caret and a capital V, and it won't actually paste anything for you. So that is a little tip in PowerShell, is right-clicking on your mouse to paste anything that you've copied, and it'll paste it all at once, but it won't execute the code until you hit the Enter button. So just bear that in mind. So once we have all of this information stored inside of our variables, we're now going to go inside of another do loop to ask about the user's description. Sometimes when you create a new user, you like the permissions that are associated with one Active Directory account, but the title's not the same, so you want to change the user's description, and that's what this portion of the do loop will do, is it'll actually allow us to change the user description, or it's going to keep it the same. And again, there's more variables, so I'm calling user1, which was up here, all of this right here, the get AD user. So this is the user that we're copying, remember, to create the new user. So we're going to call this user1 variable, but notice how there's a period at the end of this. And what this does is this actually tells PowerShell, I want you to call this variable, but the only bit of information I care about is what's in the description field. So anytime that you put a period after something, and then a parameter, it's going to specifically pull that bit of information and store it. So notice how I have user1 period description, but down below, in parentheses, I have a different version of storing the description only, not inside of a variable, but inside of the commandlet that I've created. So description, it's going to prompt, does the user's description need to be updated, yes or no? And then I have a switch. A switch is a way to go through a menu, basically, depending upon what the user inputs. So a switch can be based off of letters, it can be based off of numbers, and anything that the user enters, the switch is going to look at it inside of that variable of description and go, is the switch equal to yes? Is the switch equal to no? And then it's going to execute whatever code you have inside of the response. So let's say, yes, the user's description needs to be updated. So right here, here's my yes. It's now going to enter a new description. And so here's a new variable, new desk equals read host prompt enter new description colon, and then you enter your information. PowerShell then takes this new description and it's going to actually, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, impregnate the original variable up here that we had of yes. So this desk originally had a y in there because we said yes, it needed to be updated. So that variable stored the letter y inside of it. But now I want to replace the information inside of that variable. So it's going to overwrite the desk, the DESC, and then we said equal to the department ID. So here's our first recall of information right here. So the store abbreviation or the store name or whatever information that you want to store, it's going to take that portion of a variable and it's going to add a dash in between and then add on to the end of it the new description. And then the description, the original description that we created, is now going to be updated with this bit of code in the format that we want. And then it's going to ask us, is this correct? And it's going to show us the information after we've entered it. So we then confirm, is the user's new description or is the user's description correct, yes or no? If no, it's going to loop back through and start this whole process over again. And does the user's description need to be entered? Or to see it, press enter. You're going to hit enter. It's going to call this variable again with the description, and then it's going to ask you, does it need to be updated? You're going to hit yes. You're going to enter the new information, and it's going to ask you to confirm that it's correct. And once it's confirmed yes, it's correct, it's going to move on to the next portion of the script. So all of the variables that we have above are now going to be right host, and they're going to be shown to you. So that way, you can see everything that you've entered and make sure that it's correct before we create this new user. So it's going to read host prompt, please verify the new user's information before proceeding. And then I've got it listed out right here in a nice line table format so you can see all the information that you entered versus what it's supposed to go to. So when you call a variable inside of a quote, it's going to display it as quoted text. It's not going to be anything different. It's not going to execute any commandlets that are inside of it. It's just going to show you what's been stored inside of it. Once you confirm that this is all correct, you're going to hit yes. It goes on. It then says, okay, everything's good. It then recalls every bit of information that has been asked to be put in and create the new user. So when this line of code executes, what this is going to do is it's going to call the new username, which is the full username, so Johnny Smith. It's going to give that as the name. The instance means what we're copying, what we're using to recreate this Active Directory account, which is user1. And if you remember user1 all the way back at the top, where did it go? It's right here. That's everything that we wanted to pull relating to that Active Directory account we're targeting for copy. So member of, which are groups, whether it be security groups, distribution lists, things of that nature. Their title, their description, office, distinguished name, city, state, country, postal code, street address, department, company. Do I have department twice? No, okay. Company, script path, and telephone number. So all of that information is stored inside of the user1 variable. It's now going to be copied and applied to this new AD user that we're creating. So it asks for an account password. It's going to input the secure string password that we generated for the user. And then I tell it the given name is the first name, the surname is the last name. Display name is the new username, so the full username. So when a user logs in, it's not going to say J Smith, it'll say Johnny Smith because that's their real name. And then creates the SAM account name, which is their logon ID. It sets the user principal name, so that way the system knows who they're looking at. We use a logon script for our users to automatically map drives and printers, and that's what this bit of code does. Is the script path tells it, is there a logon script? Yes. Okay, what am I using for a logon script? And whatever's inside of that batch file is going to be used to map drives and map printers and things of that nature. You then have the department ID, which prompts and fills in the department, and then description, what you just updated if you needed to update it. If not, it's going to copy what was ever on the old user and immediately apply it to it. Once that's done, I have PowerShell spit out that the account's been created. This allows you to visually verify that the account did get created. If anything errored out for any specific reason, you'll be able to tell by looking at this because it's going to pull all of their information. So once that's done, I tell it get AD user, identity user 1, properties member of. And what this is doing is this is going back to that user 1 instance, and it's going to pull just the member of, because that's the only thing I'm looking for. So once I selected that property, I tell PowerShell to select that object and expand the property. And what that does is it expands it for PowerShell to look at and physically copy, so we can add our new user to those groups and those distribution lists and security groups automatically without having to manually add them individually, because let's just be honest, that's a pain in the butt. I don't know if you've ever done that, but if you do, and you have multiple distribution lists and multiple security groups, and you have to go through and individually add one to an account, add another, that can be a lot of typing. It can be very time consuming, and it leads to user, or I guess you could say domain admin errors, because you may miss something or you may misspell something and it doesn't apply what it's supposed to, and now this new user doesn't have the permissions or they're not a part of a security group or distribution list like they're supposed to. So it can create issues later on down the road when somebody says, well, why does this person not have access to this? They should have. And it comes back to you and you're like, oh crap, I mistyped it, or I didn't look at it right, I'm sorry, and now you have to add it, and then they have to log out and log back in, and people just get impatient. So rather than letting human error get in the way, you can script this out to automatically do it for you, so there is no room for error. As long as you've entered and you're copying the right person, it's going to automatically pull it and automatically apply them to those groups, and you don't have to do a thing with it. So here's object GUID, or the object's GUI ID. This is like a MAC address. It's their unique identifier. This will never change as long as this Active Directory object is not deleted. So this will always be the same. It's never going to change. It's kind of like a SID, a security identifier. That is never going to change as long as that Active Directory account does not get deleted. So we use this to help move Active Directory objects around in PowerShell, because it's a unique identifier. You can't get a name wrong and grab the wrong user. So when we go to move a Active Directory object into a different OU, we want to pull it based off of the object GUID, so we know that we're targeting the right person on a very high level of instance, so we can move them correctly. So object GUID is equal to get AD user SAM account. Okay, so I'm recalling this variable that I put back in all the way up here. Again, this is why I don't wipe things. This is why I always change names, so that way I can reuse things later on in different parts of the script. But I'm only calling the object GUID. Notice that this is a short get AD user, and it just provides the username. That's because PowerShell inherently returns the object GUID when you run the get AD user. And what that looks like down below is that right there. So my object GUID in this Active Directory is this ungodly long weird number that you would have to manually type out if you didn't have it automatically pull it and store it inside of an object. So this is where variables really kind of take the cake, is because imagine trying to move 5 or 6 different Active Directory users, and you have this ungodly long object user ID that you needed to use in order to move them. That's a lot of typing. That's a lot of room for human error. I am dyslexic, so anytime that I can get away from typing to minimize me inverting a number or a letter or looking at something incorrectly, I will do it to make sure that it's done correctly the first time so I don't have to go back and redo something. So I have it write host, so you know the information that it grabbed. It displays it on the screen for you. And then I do set AD user SAM enabled true. Sometimes you need to copy a disabled user because that user either left or was terminated for some unknown reason, and this new user is now replacing this person in that position. And because it's not best practice, you can't just simply rename the account and everything's hunky-dory and go on about your day. So you want to copy everything related to that profile and then set the status to enabled true. So that way this person can walk up to the computer and log in for the first time. So again, we have another function menu for OUs, and what this is going to do is display a menu for the user and tell you corporate OU, dealership 1 OU, and dealership 2 OU. These are all inside of the Siege corporate or the Siege Networks Active Directory container. So now that these are on the screen, it gives you the options of what you can do. So it's going to then ask you target path for a variable is equal to choose the user's OU location. So 1, 2, or 3. So let's say you selected 2. What that does is it then puts that variable inside of a switch with the number 2, because that's what you entered. It's now going to go down to this number 2 part of the code. It's going to say deal 1, because that's the variable I wanted to call it. And it's then going to write this information inside of the deal 1 variable. Once that deal 1 variable is created and is now storing that information, target path is going to be impregnated with this information, so we can now move this target object. So we're going to say write host. It's going to show you what your command was, and it's going to show you the output of OU users, dealership 1, so on and so forth down the way of the OUs. Then, once that information pops up, it's going to automatically move on to the next line of code, and it's going to pull this bit of information. So move AD object, TAC identity, object GUID. This is that ungodly long alphanumeric letter number dash thing that Active Directory wants, and it's then going to ask for the target path, and it's just going to take the variable that we've plugged in there. So it's now going to take the target path of this. And the beauty of being able to use this variable is you can create a menu that covers all of your OUs, all the subfolders in the OUs. So if we looked at my Active Directory, notice that inside of dealership 1, I've got computers with firewall enable, and then I have users. But inside of users, I also have cloud users, generic users, and terminated users. Okay, so not only do I have the users OU, but I can take this script and I can further delineate this and say, okay, users, I want it to now do equal to cloud users, comma. This now is going to take this object from the root, which is siegenetworks.com, in the user folder down here. It's going to take them from here and it's going to move them up into dealership 1 users, cloud users, and it's going to place that object inside of here for us. So we don't have to go through here and go in here and then right click and then move, and then we have to drill down. If you have a large Active Directory with multiple OUs, this is one of the best ways to automate the move process, because this can take time. I've been on Active Directory controllers that have had 15 to 20 different base OUs, and then inside of that, I've had multiple different locations that I could have put in, totaling probably upwards of 50 or more different OU sublocations for a user. So it can be very time consuming trying to find the proper OU that you want to put this user in. So why not create a PowerShell menu that was going to automatically do this for us? So all we have to do is look at a number and go, oh, they're in Las Vegas. They're, a record producer. So Las Vegas executive producers is where we want to put them. We then list that out. We would say, option number 2 is Las Vegas executive producers, or number 3, Las Vegas music studio, to give them different security permissions. So it's really useful to be able to do that in a quick fashion, because then you can rapidly create users and then move them into the proper OUs. So it's a really useful function. So once that is then stored inside of that variable, it moves it into the proper OU for us, and then it's going to pull the information for the user again along with the description field to show you that it's been created correctly. Once that's done, it's going to prompt you again to enter the new user that you just created's username. And with that, it plugs it into user 2, and then I have it to where it formats a list of all the information, and then it displays it on the screen for us. This one down here outputs it into a file that I can actually go back and look at and copy and paste information into an email and say, hey, here's your new user information. They're set up, ready to rock and roll. Thanks, great, have a good day. So that's a brief overview of what this will do. So I'm just going to take this line out completely, because we don't need it right now, because I don't want to output it into a file. It's not really needed, but we'll get into outputs of different file formats here in a little bit, so that way you guys can see that not only can you just display it on the screen, you can out it to a file that you can then pull up in Excel, Word, Notepad, whatever your little heart desires, so you can manipulate the information further and do an audit or have a paper trail of the information that you've pulled. So let's do File, Save. We're going to go into PowerShell, and we're going to change directories here. So cd quote, the drive I'm looking for is j:\PowerShell training, end quote. Could not find PowerShell training, because did I name it something else? PowerShell _training. Yeah, because I'm smart. Underscores are awesome. So we'll go back in here, add in our underscore. What do you mean you can't find the J drive? Okay, so let's just try this. Will you go to the J drive for me? Yeah, you'll go to the J drive for me. That's cute. So, real quick, LS is great. LS is basically list contents. It's much like the old dir used to be. Dir still works in PowerShell, spits out the same information. So if you want to list the contents of the directory that you're looking in, you can do this, which then allows you to type in one letter and hit the tab key. Which, by the way, that's one thing I haven't covered in PowerShell. PowerShell allows you to partially enter a command and then tab through a list of commands that match. So if I wanted to do get A, okay, I can get ACL, AD account authorization. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of things that get A relates to in PowerShell. So if you're not quite sure of what the actual commandlet is, but you know like the first letter or two, you can always just put in the command and then just hit the tab key. So what we're looking for is ADU. So AD user, user resultant. There's only 2 for that. So you know that get AD user is probably the one you're looking for, and you now just tabbed, you can hit the space key and keep on typing. So to show you what this user menu does, now that we've gone through all of what variables can do and what they can be used for, we'll actually show you what it looks like in action, because it's kind of nifty. What do you mean user menu is not in there? Okay. So Mistake on my part. I didn't do something in PowerShell to allow me to recall or to call remote scripts. And that's this little bit right here at the top. So you want to tell PowerShell that it's okay for remote signed executions. And the execution policy stops people from maliciously using PowerShell. So there's a couple of different versions that you can do with this. Set execution policy, TAC, execution policy, scope, force, what if, confirm, verbose, debug. So you can kind of go through all these different TACs, but the ones that I normally stick to are the remote signed. So all signed, so anything that's signed in any manner or form will be executed. Bypass, it completely bypasses the execution policy and will run whatever you want it to or whatever they want it to. The default policy, things are locked down, it needs to be signed. Make sure it's from an authoritative source that has the authority to run on this PowerShell instance. So remote signed says if it's on the same network and we want to execute it, it's safe, it's okay, we can do so. So now if we hit the enter button, it's going to ask us, the execution policy helps protect you from scripts that you do not trust. Changing the execution policy might expose you to the security risks described in the execution policy help topic at this Microsoft link. Do you want to change? So you hit A for yes to all. It then changes. We can then go up and hit this. Why will you not load my script? Misa and you are fighting, little one. Let's try moving this out of here. So we'll close out in here. Let's try test. Okay, I just modified you. I don't understand why you don't like to execute. So we're going to cut you, and we're going to put you in the C drive and see if you're going to play nice in that sandbox. Huh? Paste. Yes, I want to replace this file in this destination. It's quite okay. Okay, so we're just going to go in here, cd /. Since you want to be difficult about things, that's fine. Okay, so now it executes. It must not like the fact that it was on a phantom drive that I've got connected to an actual computer. So, now that we've executed that, we get a credential pop-up box. So you'll type in your domain name, Siege Networks /msiege. Put in your password. And what this is going to do is this is going to store your credentials inside of it so you can recall them and execute it. Sorry about that. And execute them without having to constantly re-enter your credentials. So, automatically restarts our menu for us. It didn't center it because I haven't adjusted that for this. So, now that we have that, here's our menu. So we want to create a new user. So we're going to enter the option number 1, and we're going to copy JDoGood because he's the only one I can seem to remember, apparently. So we hit enter, JDoGood. It pops up the information. Is this the proper information that you want to copy for this user? So the distinguished name. This is where he's at in the Active Directory and what OU he lives in. So notice that right here, OU cloud users, OU user, so on and so forth. His account name, his enabled status is true. His given name is Jimmy. His full name is Jimmy DoGood. Object class is user. There's his object GUID. Like I said, that's like a burned-in MAC address. It's never going to change. It's always his. Here's his SID. Same thing. That's his SID. It's never going to change unless the account's deleted. SAM account name, last name or surname, and then user principal name. So yes, this information is correct. So let's just say we want to create Kim Possible. Okay, so we'll enter in the user's logon ID, kpossible. Let's just call it CSNCO, Siege Network Corporate Office, enter new user's password. Hit enter. Notice how it came out in asterisk even though I type in plain text. PowerShell automatically secures it inside of a secure string. So we're going to see the user's description. There isn't any. So yes, we want to update the description. used sales. Is the user's description correct? Yes. Please verify the information before proceeding. So, Kim Possible, Sam account, K Possible, department SNCO, principal name K Possible at siegenetworks.com, description SNCO dash used sales. Is this information correct? Yes. Yes, it is. So, it automatically executes, creates the account, applies the information that we want it to have, and now we can see all of the information of the newly created user account that we would want to pull. So the object GUID. So now we're going to move this object. So this right here is the what we're targeting with this move. So OU choices. Notice how this automatically pops up down here. That's because that object GUID automatically pulled that information for us, so we didn't have to. I need to open a new folder. That's what I need to do. Open folder. We want to go here, and we just want to open the C drive. So there's our test script that we created. So let's look at the object GUID script. Remember, it's going to automatically pull it for us, and that's why we're seeing that information. So it created the new user, it pulled the information, and here's her object GUID, and this is where the right host popped up and showed us what her object ID is. So now we want to choose what location she's going to. I want to put her in dealership 2, so I'm going to hit number 3, and it's going to spit out a whole bunch of information. Choose the user's OU location. You chose 3, so this is the information that it's going to put in. Description for the new user, distinguished name, CN, conical name, Kim Possible, and notice she's in the proper OU. Her status is enabled true. Object GUID, all the information is entered in the way we want it. So we're going to do K Possible because we just want to double and triple verify. So we always have checks and balances to make sure that everything's pulled the way we want it to. So this check is in here because typically you'll want to have a city, an office, a postal code, street address. So that way that information is associated with that user. Now that you're done, this will sit here until you hit the enter button. And once you hit the enter button, it's going to return you back to the beginning part of the menu to allow you to do and move on with whatever else you need to move on with. So if we're to close PowerShell, we'll go over here, we'll minimize that, and we come in here. This is our Active Directory container, remember. We'll go down to dealership 2. User, Kim Possible, look at that. She's already there for us. She's been moved into the proper OU. And we didn't really do anything except entered 5 bits of information, and our script did the rest of it for us automatically. That is a basic automation script in PowerShell because it automatically created everything with a few bits of information that we put in, and our job is done. So, like I said, variables are extremely useful, they're extremely powerful, and they make our lives easier as people who want to automate things because we can store information and recall it at the drop of a hat inside of a code without having to constantly re-enter all this information every time that we want to execute a code. You guys can feel free to copy this. I will try and find a way to upload a copy of this file for you. So that way, what do you mean missing command? I'm not missing anything, wee one. Don't lie. Function, show menu. That's what you do. Did I delete something without... No? No, sure didn't. Everything executes the way that it's supposed to, wee one. So, like I said, it allows you to... Yeah, it's fine. Leave it alone. Variables allow you to store and recall information at the drop of a hat and not have to constantly retype things in. So practice using the variables and doing cool little tricks and teaching yourself how to use them properly. The read host and write host are extremely useful when you're wanting to prompt for user input. And make sure that when you do use them, one, that your variables are very descriptive in what information they're going to be holding. That's why if you notice a lot of the times as I kind of went through, selection. This is the user selection from the menu above. What did they enter for a choice? That's their selection. The user. I could probably name that better and say user copy or copy user to further delineate this is the user that we're copying compared to the new user that we're creating. So just be as descriptive as you can with your variables, so that way if someone else comes behind you and wants to update and add something into the script, they know what your variables are going to do and what they're holding for that information. Otherwise, you can get into these weird instances where somebody's like, oh, well, I didn't know that's what that was doing because it wasn't clearly labeled. So just make sure that your code and your variables describe everything you're trying to do, so that way someone else that comes behind you can go, oh, okay, I know what this is. Great. And they don't question anything, because otherwise you can get into a whole bunch of funsies and whatnots trying to make sure things run the way they're supposed to. There's nothing missing. Stop lying. Anywho, I'll tinker with that in a little bit to figure out why it's whining. But that's an introduction to variables, well, more than an introduction. That's a full explanation of what variables are, how we can use them, and how useful they are, especially in scripting and coding, because it's information that we don't have to type in. So that's going to be it for today, guys. It's kind of a long video. I'm sorry, but variables are extremely important, and I wanted to make sure that we had good coverage. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until next time, keep scripting, keep practicing. PowerShell is not as scary as everyone makes it out to be, but you can mess some stuff up if you don't know what you're doing, so be cautious and ask questions. Have a good day, guys.